All right. Hey, folks, it's Faz here from Faz Lifts. Today is going to be the long-awaited critique of Westside Barbell. Firstly, thanks for making it onto my channel. I welcome any likes and subscribes. Also, if you'd like to work with me on your strength and physique goals, there is a link in the description. All right, so let's get on with this. Now, before I go into the critique, I want you guys to understand my perspective. I have been researching and looking at Westside Barbell routine, and also I've practiced Westside Barbell and the conjugate method for many times since as early as 99 and 2000 when I actually started lifting. So I'm familiar with Westside and Louis Simmons for about 22 years at this point. So whatever I do say will come from a place of respect, and he's somebody who I massively respect in the industry. And even just man to man, the fact that he's been able to do it for so long, I can appreciate how tough that is. So I have massive respect for him. So if I do give a critique and you're like, oh God, I can't believe Faz said that, I just understand, like, I've been doing this for a while. Whatever I say is from an honest place of critique. So let's begin. Now, firstly, I like to give a bit of a history of the routine. And so Westside Barbell, it all started with Louis. Louis is the real deal. Like, he is, like, Louis is the man. Like, I know there's a lot of memes about Louis these days, but he is the man. For me, in terms of coaches coming out of the US, he's one of the top guys. There are other coaches, roughly Louis' age range, who are popular and operate out of the US, who I have pretty much zero respect for. Some of you guys might know who that I'm talking about. Louis is not one of them. Louis is right up there. He is the man. Now, Louis was a very good competitive powerlifter back in the day. Now, what happened with Louis was he suffered a very severe spinal injury, and that forced him to innovate. It forced him to read books, and it forced him to get better. He didn't want to give up powerlifting. He loved powerlifting. And I love that about Louis. Like, you can just tell he loves lifting. It inspires you. That alone endears me to the man. I've never met him, but I'd love to meet him at some point. So Louis knew he needed to innovate. So he got his head into the books and he figured things out. And he figured out, okay, well, how am I going to do this without just smashing away at the lifts like I used to do? So what he used to do was your regular sort of linear periodization cycles, where he would go from the higher reps, cycle down into the lower reps, kind of like the pyramid style, you know, like a typical Ed Cohen type of routine. And so he realized that wasn't for him, because he couldn't put his body under that same repetitive stress over and over and over. He had to vary things around, but then he needed a system. So he basically figured it out himself, and he created the Westside Barbell method. So what I wanted to do with this critique is do this a little bit different from my previous one. So the last ones that I've done, sort of where I've done, like, say, 5-3-1 or critiqued like the Glenn Penley's method, that's been more looking at the actual specific routine. This is going to be critiquing from a top-down perspective, because Westside Barbell and the conjugate method is based more on principles than it is based on specific routines. So that's the magic of the method. It is a method. It's not a specific routine. And that's what I love about it. And that's what I love about Louis. So without coming across as too much of a fanboy, I am going to give a critique, because there are some things that I would improve on, and things that have been discussed over the last 2 decades anyway. None of what I'm about to say is going to be revolutionary for those of you guys at home, because people have critiqued Westside back and forth, up and down over the last couple of decades, and probably longer. So the main things that I want to discuss today are the max effort method, the dynamic effort, the repetition method, and building work capacity. So if we look at the max effort method, firstly, I feel that as a powerlifter, we should be in touch with single repetition work year round. Now, people might disagree with me on that. Like, if you were looking at regular linear periodization, the type of thing that Ed Cohen did, would be like, you don't do singles year round because it's a lot of stress on the body. Yes, it is. But you can manage that stress in certain ways, I feel. So I feel like if you are a powerlifter, it is your job to be in touch with heavy powerlifting and heavy weights at least year round. You know, it doesn't have to be absolute maximal weights, but it should be heavy weights. We are powerlifters after all, and our job is to be accustomed to lifting heavy. So I do include that in my own training routines as well. For those of you who signed up to my tactician book, which is in the description, my method does involve relatively heavy singles year round, week in, week out. And I feel that similar to what Louis says, the max effort method is essential for powerlifters because we are in the business of lifting heavy. Therefore, we need to be accustomed to doing that year round. So my critique, however, would be in how often it's varied. Now, this, and again, this is where immediately people are going to start to disagree because it is a method. They are guidelines. They're not hard and fast rules. But certainly the overridingly popular approach, certainly the original approach, was to vary the exercises either week in, week out, or every couple of weeks. Now, later on, people were saying vary them every 3 weeks, and that's a little bit better. So I would be happier with that. If you took a variation, got stronger at it over 3 weeks, and then rotated something else, that's an improvement. However, I'm just going to share some real life experience of mine. I've seen people do rotations where they're perhaps coming back to a specific list maybe every 3 months. And so they'll have like 12 variations they'll cycle through, or 6 variations for 2 weeks each they'll cycle through. They'll come back to something after 3 months and they would not have improved. So 3 months is a long time to go without knowing that you've improved or not. That's my problem with it, okay? Now, with my method, with my coaching, I want to see tangible improvements of some kind every block of training. So at every 5 to 6 weeks, I want to see and I want to quantify something which is tangibly improved. Okay, so my issue with the max effort method in the traditional way that it's been employed, which is very, very frequent variation, is that you go quite a long time without knowing if you've progressed or not. Now, it's great if you come back to it 3 months later and you're stronger. Happy days. But if you're not, then that's a long time to go without knowing. That's my only issue there. So I think we should possibly have a system whereby we're doing the lifts a little bit more frequently. I still like variation. And I think for the max effort method, where he's right, is that I think you shouldn't be maxing. And if you are maxing, they should be on assistance exercises rather than things like competition lifts. They should be specifically on things that you're not good at. So that much, I agree with him wholeheartedly. And my approach does the exact same thing, just in a different way. Louis felt that rotation was a lot more important and a lot more relevant the more advanced you got. And obviously, Louis being Louis, and as I said, the way that he embarked upon this was out of a place where he was injured. So he needed the variety so he wouldn't get stagnant on any one exercise. So I can understand his perspective, why he wanted frequent variation on anything which was going to go on very, very heavy. And I can also understand when you've got guys who are doing some of the assistance exercises, perhaps in the 800s to 900s to 1,000 pounds range, I can understand why they wouldn't want to do that more than once and then move on. I get it. Especially the type of atmosphere that Louis has cultivated at his barbell club, which is a very competitive, hyper sort of like aggressive atmosphere where that max really is a max, and you definitely don't want to be doing anything close to that movement pattern again next week. So I get it. I get why he's done that. My only sort of qualm with that is odds are you're not a 1,000 pound squatter, and odds are you're not training at Westside Barbell with all these animals around you. That's all I'm saying. Like, just be realistic. It's like, if you're going to do it, great. Maybe just do the max effort exercise for 2-3 weeks before you move on. Maybe just have a tighter rotation. Maybe only rotate 3 exercises around for 3 weeks each. So at least every 9 weeks, you know if you've progressed or not. I don't think that's too much to ask for. I think that's reasonable. That's a reasonable adjustment because most of the people who are doing this are not 1,000 pound squatters. They are less than that, whatever. Even if it's up to 600, maybe 400, 500. And I think it's just a bit more appropriate to have a bit more practice on the lifts because you can get more out of it. You don't need that massive level of weekly variation. You need to stick to an exercise for a few weeks, maybe stick to a few variations and then move on. And that should be a decent 6-month cycle. I don't feel you need to change everything so often. And I think that's fair. I think that's a fair point. Certainly, those are some of the adjustments that I've seen over the years has been to reduce variation and to keep people using variations for longer. I think it was Matt Wenning, right off the top of my head, who maybe decided on guys doing 3-week cycles. I don't know. But it's certainly been tossed around quite a lot over the years that for maximal effort for lifters who are more intermediate, they should probably do things which for a little bit longer. That's all. Anyway, we can move on. All right, dynamic effort. Yeah, again, big fan. I also employ something very similar in my own training methods. we are powerlifters after all, aren't we? So yes, we've done all this max effort on assistance exercises, but we need to keep in touch with the contest lifts. Again, I agree completely with that, and that's what I base my routines on as well. I also do fast, I guess you could call it dynamic effort work. I don't really do that. I call it a light day because I happen to think that everything should be dynamic, everything should be explosive. And I think oftentimes this is probably, if I'm going to critique the dynamic effort, it's probably this. I'll say that the differences between the dynamic and maximal effort sometimes are quite overblown. And again, it's a case of knowing your audience. So if your squat is like, I don't know, like 3 plates a side, like something like that, if you only squat 140 or 300 pounds in America, then doing speed work at, say, 70 kilos, like that's not going to do a great deal for you. It's not really going to tire you out. It's not going to have a massively great training effect. So you might need to go a little bit heavier just to get an effect out of it. Like, you got to remember, those guys were doing speed work with chains, bands, and it was hard. Like, it wasn't supposed to be easy. Like, it was supposed to give you some practice on the competition lifts very, very rapidly. So I feel that sometimes the differences between the maximal effort and the dynamic effort are a little bit overblown. Like, they should both be explosive and they should both be hard. All right. So you should be putting out full effort on both of those things. Like, it's not a case of maximal, you're going to grind, dynamic, you're going to be fast. Like, they should both be really hard in their own right. And they shouldn't just be hard because you're taking a minute rest. You know, they should be hard because you're doing hard sets, but you should be moving fast. So to make that guidance a little bit more appropriate for those who are more beginner to intermediate, I would say you may need to raise the percentages a little bit. That's all. That I think you've got to basically just you got to be sensible about it. You got to adjust it. If 50% to 60% is not really working for you, then raise the weight on the bar. Just raise it to the point where it gives you a training effect. Like, if you've done 8 triples in a squat in 8 minutes and your legs aren't rubber, then you've done something wrong, right? So just bear that in mind. Like, just be sensible about it. Yes, I think it's a great method. Yes, I use something very similar in my own training methods. I like light work. I like light work triples specifically. You know, I like it. I think, again, this is more just a case of appropriateness for the audience. But I'm sure that's been covered lots over the last couple of decades. So yeah, dynamic effort, in summary, I'm a big fan. And I think it goes well with the maximal effort on assistance exercises, dynamic effort on the contest lifts, and maximal effort on the assistance lifts that you're not very good at. It's a good marriage. Final thing is repetition method. Yeah, I feel this is crucial. Again, basic bodybuilding work in the right areas. I think this is great. You want to be building up your level of muscle mass. Additional work in this area is good. And it points to one of the massive pros to this routine is that every facet of training is trained separately. So, like, yes, we're doing reps, we're doing bodybuilding work, sure. But it's not bodybuilding work on the assistance lifts, and it's not competition style repetition light work. It is its own style of work, which we do specifically as bodybuilding work. I get it. Like, it's nice to be able to train every facet of a athlete's improvement separately. Is a really, really good way of doing things. I do the same thing with my sports clients. So, like soccer players, hockey players, CrossFitters, stuff like that. I think it's one of the reasons where one of the main areas where modern sports go wrong. And then particularly over here in the UK, the level of training that you see coaches utilizing in, say, soccer and hockey is horrendous. Like, it's really amateur. And they just basically have them doing the games over and over again. There is nothing to be heard of in terms of training individual aspects of the game. Like, just briefly, tangentially, if we were to take a soccer player, for example, a soccer player needs to train certainly his skill on the ball and his plays, but he also needs to train his physical aspects. He needs to train his aerobic capacity. He needs to train his various other aspects of the aerobic capacity. There's a whole bunch of ways you can break down cardiovascular conditioning. So that's a whole multitude of different ways. CrossFitters are another example. Like, CrossFit training for most people is just going to the box and doing stuff. And every now and again, doing a little bit of extra, like maybe strength work if the box is clued up. But the reality is the top level guys and girls don't train like that. They split up every facet of the training. And that's what's good about the Westside Barbell method, is that it splits up every facet of training. Every facet is done separately. Maximal effort is trained separately. Repetition effort is trained separately, as is dynamic effort. They're all trained separately. And that's one of the reasons why it's so powerful, because you go direct to the skill you're trying to improve and you train that with the right method. That is really important. And just as a tip from me to you guys, like, that is a key to advanced training in sports. So next up is building work capacity. This is something I feel which is very important, and you see it a lot with Louis' extra sessions. I think this is great personally. Like, this is, and again, it's very specific. So whereas, somebody else might do a lot of cardio on the side, like Arnold used to recommend doing a lot of running on the beach, before a competition, stuff like that. Building work capacity, I personally think this is crucial. You've got to have a certain level of endurance in those areas that you're trying to put under a lot of load. Okay, it's just being fit, it's just being ready. And I think that's what he calls it. He calls it general physical preparedness, just being ready, GPP. So yeah, building work capacity is a perfect way of describing what he's trying to do there. And again, it's what I do in my programs. I'm always looking to improve someone's work capacity. Over time, we do more and more and more and more and more. The only difference is with my routines, I aim to have the work a little bit more specific to the actual competition lifts. So that's kind of where I differ with Louis. But that may be for the audience that we're talking to. I'm not talking to 1,000-pound squatters. So there we go. All right, so this is kind of the point that I was saying. So every facet of training is directed. This is one thing that I really love about Louis' way of training. Every aspect of training is trained separately as a unique skill. So you want to get explosive with the main lifts, you train that separately as a dynamic effort method. You want to get a lot stronger in areas that you're not as strong on. Great, you train that by the maximum effort method with areas that you're weak in. Perfect, makes perfect sense. You want to get bigger in certain areas, you use the repetition method. You want to build work capacity, you add in extra sessions. It's all very directed. It's the complete polar opposite of, I'm going to pick on CrossFit a little bit, not because I don't like CrossFit, but just simply because a lot of CrossFit training is horrendous for the most part, because in boxes, a lot of what they'll do is just CrossFit WODs over and over and over. That'll be the main thing they just pound. And that will get you so far, but then you'll hit a wall. And then you'll have to train like this, every facet of training separately. So it is analogous in that respect. It's the same with soccer players. You can get so far by having to kick around with your mates on a Sunday afternoon, right? After a while, you'll need to do more training. Then after a while, you'll need to split up that training, do specific ball work, do specific cardiovascular training, then specific strength training. And within the cardiovascular training, there is probably 6 separate other facets of training which are involved too. So all of these things have to be trained separately for maximum adaptation. That's the we live in an age of specialization, basically. So that is why Louis excelled. He specialized in every facet of training. All right, so to summarize, I'm a huge fan of Louis, first and foremost, and I'm a huge fan of what he's done in the sport. I am a big fan of the top-down principles of conjugate training. I mean, I'd be a hypocrite if I didn't say I was, because a lot of my training mirrors the same principles. I just set things up differently. I think the practical limitations generally can be summed up by the further you are away from 1,000-pound squat, right, the less you should be thinking about rotating exercises. The more you should keep the exercises consistent. So that's the first thing. I think that's a fair statement, and I don't actually think that's a statement Louis himself would disagree with. So if you've got a guy who's squatting 400 pounds, I don't think it behooves him to rotate his max effort lifts every week. It doesn't. And the next thing is, I think, alongside that, again, talking to the intermediate person, the underperformance of contest style speed work, like, it should be a demanding day. Those light triples are not supposed to be a walk in the park. They're supposed to be hard. And if they're not hard, put more weight on the bar. Still move it fast, but put more weight on the bar. That's the point. You're supposed to be moving a weight fast, but not a weight which is just light and easy. And yes, if you still only squat 3 plates aside, I don't care that 70 kilos is your 50%, and that's what Louis wants you to squat. Use your brain, okay? Use a little bit more weight on the bar. Make sure it's challenging. It should be challenging. So in summary, yeah, huge fan of the program. I think a couple of areas, like I've listed here, as I've just explained, could be improved for the average lifter, for the intermediate, sort of late beginner stage, early intermediate, late intermediate style of lifter. But for the truly advanced, well, I don't know better than Louis. Louis is the man. Louis churns out high-level lifters like no one else. So, yeah, couldn't possibly critique what he's done for lifters that he coaches at all. I just think for Gen Pop and for possibly the audience that are listening to this video, those are some of the changes that I would make. And therein lies my critique of Louis' Westside Barbell. I'm looking forward to seeing the reaction on this one. As I say, if you are a young 25-year-old YOLO who's thinking to himself, how dare Faz disrespect Louis, that just remember that I was doing Westside when you were still in your diapers. So remember that. All right, I'll call it there. Take it easy, guys. See you next video.